Imagine you're a Vietnamese born after 2000. Lucky you, the war has ended and Vietnam has become one of the fastest growing market-oriented economies in Asia. Like many other students, you are expected to learn national history and remember past sacrifice. In classrooms, on television, and during national holidays, the war is remembered as one of the most defining chapters of modern Vietnamese history. But still difficult to fully understand. So you, at 12 years old, came and asked your grandfather. He proudly told you about stories of resistance, reunification, and national pride. Your home was also filled with medals, framed certificates, and memories of that generation. To your young mind, the story were a little bit simple. Then one day, you visit your friend's house. Her grandfather served in the Republic of Vietnam. And for the first time, you hear a very different story of the war. Not from a textbook, a television, or official speeches, but from those who actually live in it. Years later, that moment still stays with you because it leaves one question unanswered. How can one war produce so many different stories? The answer might lie in something more powerful than the weapon itself. The media. Hi, I'm Maddie, or you can call me Như Ý, which is my Vietnamese name. I'm currently studying Bachelor of Communication in Melbourne. So today, on the 51st anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War, or for Vietnamese, we call it Cuộc kháng chiến chống Mỹ, I made this video to answer one question. How did the media manufacture the reality in North Vietnam, South Vietnam, and in the US? But before the video started, I would like to share some thoughts about the name the Vietnam War. Actually, there has been a debate around whether it should be called the Vietnam War or the American War due to the notions of who lost and who won during the war. However, in this video, I would love to call it the Vietnam War because it's the most popularized term used by the world. So let's start the video. First, we need to understand the media landscape back then. In the North, according to Nhân Dân, báo chí cách mạng Việt Nam không chỉ là phương tiện thông tin mà còn là vũ khí sắc bén trên mọi mặt trận tư tưởng, văn hóa và đóng vai trò quan trọng trong công cuộc bảo vệ và xây dựng đất nước. So basically, the press was managed all by the state and was a very powerful tool to use to enhance the propaganda. The North government also implemented a press revolutionary strategy being called three-pronged attack. Ba mũi giáp công, according to Leake's book in 1992, including people mobilization, dân vận, focused on consolidating belief and strengthening public confidence in the communist state, particularly for North Vietnamese cadres and people. Military mobilization, binh vận, targeted the South Vietnamese population. The document notes that propaganda was designed to divide, disrupt, and influence public opinion against the governments of South Vietnam and its US support. The last one, enemy mobilization, địch vận. This was mainly accomplished through propaganda aimed at the enemy, such as the very popular case of Hanoi Hana broadcasting English radio towards US soldiers.
GI, your government has abandoned you. Defect, GI.
In general, the North Vietnam saw the strategic role of the press, therefore they tried to manage it closely and effectively. On the other hand, the press in the South was more decentralized. It also embraced vibrant film scenes, singers, and pornography as an influence from the United States pop cultures. One thing that happened to press that time was this censorship from Ngô Đình Diệm. Despite having claimed to have freedom of speech and liberty, Ngô Đình Diệm in 1954 imposed censorship to all press while reinforcing the state narrative. So, flying to the other part of the world, the United States. In the United States, journalists actually have more freedom of speech. However, they mainly relied on government sources. So it was pretty much that they were reinforcing the government's propaganda without realization and without choice. After 1968, more journalists came to Vietnam to fact-check and then created the first television role in the US history. And that was the broad context of the media. Now we're gonna jump to another part of how media actually influence people following the event timeline. In 1954 to 1956, there was an event called Land Reform or Cải cách ruộng đất. This event was reported to cause thousands of deaths and imprisons of civilians and landowners caused by the North Army. Actually, as a Vietnamese born after 2000, I hardly remember any highlight in the event throughout the textbook. On my review with the newspapers released by state-owned media, the word was used to mention to the event was mistake, một sai lầm. And it was happened because the event just went beyond the control without the realization of President Ho Chi Minh. After he noted about the event, he apologized publicly and took all responsibility for himself. The South media used this case as an evidence of the communist brutality, which later haunted thousands of South Vietnamese and fueled their belief that they will all be executed. Now we're gonna fly back to America. Until 1968, the American news operations tended to edit out the blood and gore and avoid direct criticisms of military operations. Despite occasional cries, Kennedy and Johnson were usually able to manage the view very effectively. Death rates increased. However, Americans were told not to worry, and that the enemy was killed as a ratio of 10 out of 1. Reports said that Americans didn't care about that. There was some small protests happen in the South. There was corruption, protests, and religious discrimination happening in the city. The Ngô Đình Diệm government's policy to control the press was also reflected in the Article 16 of the 1956 Constitution. With this vague language in the law, the press in the 9 years under Ngô Đình Diệm rule did not have a total freedom by the standard of the European or American press. One case with the Tự Do Freedom Agency was one of the independent voice, but then being ruled by the government after all editors being imprisoned for criticizing the government. Then after the 1968, here came the broken trust of the US media. US media were exposed to images of self-immolations of Thích Quảng Đức. Such incidents convinced people around the world that Diệm government was repressive, but the resident was unmoved. Later, the milestone came when Americans found out about the Tet Offensive and also My Lai massacre, with a reputable journalist, Walter Cronkite from SBC, declaring the US was mired in stalemate in Vietnam. This led to a nationwide movement by the late 1960s and the early 1970s, involving millions of Americans on the streets. At the same time, back to the North government, they want to make sure that all journalists capture the photos that show signs of Americans' failure. To be more specific, the North proactively allowed Western correspondents with anti-war or neutral stance to film the devastation of US bombing on civilians, thereby sparking a wave of anti-war sentiments on global television, such as the 1968 attack on the US Embassy in Saigon. This turned out to be a successful move. According to leads, it proved to be a decisive political victory by scattering the US government's claim of progress and turning American public against the wall. South government media further illustrated a bloodbath future at Saigon. Some sources say that the South Vietnam back then weren't just divided by pro or anti-communism, but they could also be anti-war, democracy advocate, or just neutral civilians being stuck in between. In 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. Americans withdrew and started to evacuate. South Vietnam were all scared and confused. They were desperate to come with American pilots at all costs. In 1975, President Diem Văn Minh of the Republic of Vietnam broadcasted unconditional surrender, which is later mentioned as a good act in saving thousands of lives. Vietnamese who stayed went through re-education camps after release back to their family. And finally, here comes the peace. Throughout history, media plays a very important role in so many different battles, also include the Vietnam War or Cuộc kháng chiến chống Mỹ. There are some debates now whether the US would have won if they restricted the media more effectively, but the broad answer was no. According to Haley in the book The Uncensored War, the Media in Vietnam, the coverage was all on the tactical level and followed the existing doubts from politicians at that time. Now the world is pretty much healed between the North and the South of Vietnam, and also in the relationship between the United States and Vietnam. Now in 2026, I think that the biggest victory after the Vietnam War was the peace for all. For now, I would love to repeat that I feel really grateful for having peace that I'm living for today. I know that somewhere in the world there's still war, and it's important for all of us to fight for it.